All right. Yes, we are
Hello.
live.
Hello,
Hello,
hello, hello.
Stephanie and Sabrina show.
Yes, it
Yes. Or
is.
the Sabrina and Stephanie show. Not sure
Either
which.
order works well. Yes.
Well, we are so excited to be here with you today. And we are talking about, what do you know? Conflict. Again,
Yes.
you can't have
Yes.
enough of it.
No, not at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just think this topic is so important, and particularly because of all that's been happening in our world lately,
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
just cannot seem to get enough, like you said,
I
of
agree.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and conflict itself is not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
Conflict is important in healthy relationships and how to manage that, but you've got to deal with it in the appropriate way. So,
Absolutely. Well, I
yeah,
think, if I may, Stephanie, I
you
think I
may.
cannot help but to think that the universe was in cahoots, that's the right word, with us today, having this particular topic as the monumental decision Roe versus
Mhm,
Wade was
mhm,
just overturned. It
mhm.
sounds like either this morning or maybe late yesterday, but the
Yeah,
announcement has just come out that it was overturned.
right.
And it leads us to me to a perfect topic today, which we slightly altered the topic from maybe what was
Yeah, the
advertised
original.
online. But really, we're talking about toxic friendships, coworkers, and really people that feel like the world is against me.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you, for women in the United States right now, it's hard to not feel like our world is against us after this decision coming out. But it also had me thinking too about toxic coworkers and
Yeah,
the sense that, what happens, particularly in our world where typically the majority rules rule, is
yeah,
often utilized to pass policy.
right.
And in this example, I can't help. Now, granted, I've been many things in my career, never a Supreme Court justice, of course. Not
You have.
at least not at this point.
Oh, okay. That shocked me, but go ahead.
But what I will say is, imagine, I can only imagine that the people that voted for this particular decision, at a minimum, were all of the male justices, which are the majority, in fact. And with that understanding, imagine someone having the decision making power over your life. I mean, a significant and intimate part of your life. And
Mhm.
that person has maybe even the opposite view of how
Yeah.
you would view your own life. And what is that? How does that play out? What does it look like in the world in which we live? And I think, this is a great example of just that.
Mm.
So while that may not be completely the topic that we're talking about today, I think the fallout from what happened today can show up easily in our discussion today. But I couldn't go on without acknowledging that. So Stephanie, thank you for
Yeah,
allowing me to sidebar this intro a little bit this
absolutely.
morning.
Yeah, well, I think that's really interesting, and I think there's so much to unpack. So let's. Do you want to go through kind of the PowerPoint here, and then we'll dive into things?
Yeah, that would be good. Well, first,
Okay.
I think we should start with just some quick introductions.
Oh, yeah, maybe
Um,
we should, huh?
so I'll start with who I am, Stephanie, and if you'll tell people who you are.
Sounds
Hi,
good.
I'm Stephanie. I'm sorry. Actually, hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Sabrina Townsend. I'm currently working and supporting the Elevate organization with our founder being out of the UK. But really, we are a collective of professional, intellectual
Yeah.
speakers, trainers, consultants, business owners, family members, spouses, all of the above.
Mhm.
People really just looking to make a difference in the world. So, with that, I bring you greetings.
Yes,
Stephanie?
yay. And I am Stephanie Olson. I am a speaker, I am a podcaster, and the CEO of an organization called the Set Me Free Project. And just love to have these conversations. They're so important. And I think just to really have these conversations, whether through Elevate or whatever platform, that we can just really um, come to conversation about things that are extremely important, helpful in our
Yes,
daily life and our work life and things like that. So, yeah, I'm excited to dive in.
absolutely.
Although
So,
I cannot relate because I've never had a toxic friend or coworker. So, I'm just have
well,
to imagine and yeah, yeah.
and as we say in my world, Stephanie, today you gonna learn. So, so I hope that we can advise you what that's like. Although I
Yeah,
have a
I
sneaky suspicion that you may have a little bit of a small reference
maybe a
point.
little bit of some experience there. Yes.
So if you
Okay.
don't mind to advance the slide. Oh,
I love that.
I'm starting to wonder if this looks vaguely familiar with anybody's
It's possible.
friendships or
Mhm.
or maybe what happened right before the vote, that historic vote. Who knows what may have gone on? There have been rumors that in past times our White House has looked like that. I mean, there's been all sorts of
My guess
situations.
is our White House has looked like that for years and years and years and years.
Yes. Exactly. And, just a quick sidebar. I think that, it's very hard to imagine conflict sometimes happening in a professional environment. But if you have people, then you often have conflict. So
Do, yeah.
being in a professional environment or at work or, which is often what we refer to, this is inevitable. I mean,
Right.
hopefully
Right.
not the physicality of this picture, but certainly, and in some cases, maybe even so, have
Yeah.
occurred in the workplace.
Yeah.
So today we really want to kind of talk about and talk through examples of this conflict and what you should do um, if
So
it
that you
does
don't look
occur.
like that.
Yes, yes, exactly. That's our hope. So if you'll
That is our
advance
hope.
to the next
Yes.
slide. Okay, so obviously we've started with some introductions. We'll talk a little bit about what this means and what we're going to cover today. We'll share some stories, which is, typically the way we like to express ourselves here. We'll talk about some solutions. We'll take any questions and answers, of course, and then we'll wrap up and talk about kind of what's coming next. So I think that's a good way to get us started.
I think
Can you
that's
advance the
perfect.
next
Yes,
slide?
ma'am. I'm doing good.
Yes.
I'm in charge of this
Yes,
slideshow. I feel like I'm just, yeah, I'm on it. Go ahead.
exactly. So you are absolutely. So, is everyone toxic? We'll talk about some scenarios. Then we'll talk a little bit about who can help us. Um,
Mhm.
So I think that that's important. So for now, I think we can pause our slides and kind of jump
Okay,
into today.
let's do this thing.
So thank you so much, Stephanie, for being our trusted servant.
That's what I'm here for. That's what
Yes,
I'm here
yes,
for.
yes. So, what's interesting is that, again, as I mentioned earlier, and you've already mentioned that, these toxic relationships can show up anywhere. And really, I think we have to start by saying, what do we mean by toxic?
Yeah, yeah,
And really, when you think about a toxic relationship, if you think about toxicity, right, we oftentimes think about things in your cabinet with a skeleton and bones with a cross through, things that bring harm or hurt to you
mhm,
in an excessive way, is really what I think about when I think of toxicity. And in relationships, these are the people that oftentimes bring such angst to your world, such
right,
frustration, such disappointment. And oftentimes, these are the people that you can't reason with.
right.
There's not a healthy way, or you haven't been able to find a healthy way to relate to them.
Yeah.
And typically when you think of extreme arguments, we're not talking about what I would say cultural ways to communicate, where there's some cultures where, yelling and arguing is just a part of that.
Right.
But
Right.
what we're
It's
talking
how you
about,
show your love.
exactly,
Right.
exactly. But I think, when I'm referencing toxicity, it's really, you're losing sleep at night. You may be so upset you cannot think. Or you may find yourself saying things to the other person that you later regret.
Yeah.
You may find yourself, maybe even sometimes unable to eat, or, avoiding this person at all costs.
Yeah.
But really, you have such an emotional reaction to this person that you just cannot get past it. I mean, I don't know how else to say it other than that.
Oh,
And
where'd I go? Can you
oh no,
hear
you're
me?
still here. You're still
Oh,
here.
okay, good,
Yeah.
good.
You thought you lost yourself.
I
No,
thought
you're
I
here.
lost. I feel like I've lost myself. I need to.
But
Yeah.
thank you. But what I was thinking is that, this kind of shows up in two different places. Sometimes it can show up in your
Yeah.
friend group,
Yeah.
amongst friends, and a lot of times I find that some of the people that maybe you've known the longest, those relationships can transform over time, because sometimes there's this misunderstood idea that longevity means comfort to basically not be as nice or not be as
Mhm.
considerate.
Mhm.
And then I also think that it can show up at work as well,
Yeah.
where, people that you spend a lot of time with, in fact, most of our day with,
Right.
these issues or conflicts can arise in those working relationships. And after a while, they can cross over into this area or pool of resentment or frustration or difficulties where you find you can't resolve them in a typical way.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts about that, Stephanie?
Well, I also think that, when you're talking about toxic relationships, that the more emotionally attached you are to that relationship, the harder it is. And so,
Absolutely.
especially, whether you're dealing with a friendship, whether you're dealing with a family member, but even a coworker that maybe you have gotten too close to, or whatever
Yeah.
the case may be, the a toxic person in your life, or someone who has kind of narcissistic characteristics, if you don't care about that person or care about what they think about you, it doesn't really affect you a whole lot. It may be an
Yeah.
extreme annoyance. It may be, okay, I'm sick of dealing with this person, but the actual emotional pain might not be there. And
Hmm.
so I think that's when it gets really challenging, because it starts to become personal,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that's hard to deal with.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of so many examples.
Right. Oh gosh. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, yeah. So let's dive in. Do you have a little story that you'd like to share?
Possibly, possibly. So I'll start with the kind of story number one, which is everyone is against me.
Okay.
And with that, I'm thinking about someone that I've known a long time, and I would say this is a friendship example.
Okay.
So again, someone that I've known for probably over 30 years, possibly.
Wow.
Oh, that's
Wow.
dating myself. Okay,
Wow.
over
Well,
20
so you
is
were
what I
born
meant.
and
And
in
right. And in the womb, we were
right.
friends,
Wow,
right?
that's awesome. Good for you.
um, so what I'll say is that, this is someone who has, taken a slightly different path
Yeah.
from what I did, and many of her peers in this friend group. And as a result, um, she actually chose to have a child at a pretty young age. So she was, sort of thrust into adulthood
Okay.
sooner than the rest of the peers in our group. So she had a level of responsibility that we did not choose until later. in life, in our lives. And, you know, with responsibility and being thrust into new responsibilities, there comes stress naturally. And I
Absolutely.
think that as a result, she, in her stress, she started to find ways that weren't the healthiest for coping for her.
Sure.
So she utilized this newfound responsibility as probably more of a burden than a blessing. And as a result, she often spent a lot of her time looking for other people to help shoulder her burden.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, Not uncommon for a young lady having a child at an
Yeah.
early age.
Yeah. That's a lot.
You know, I think the unfortunate part for her is that she really did not have a wealth of support um, when she made this decision. So, while many young ladies who may have a baby at a young age may have family support, or, you know, oftentimes family support to help them with this process, or maybe the support from the father of this child, she really didn't have either. She
Wow.
didn't have a lot of family support. She also didn't have a lot of um, uh, support from the father of this child. And as a result, she did have was fortunate to have some friends that were supportive. So many of us became instant, you know, babysitters for her when she
Okay.
wanted to do different
Yeah.
things, or she had responsibilities that she couldn't reschedule. However, you know, as time went on, she developed some other habits that weren't that great. So she started utilizing, you know, alcohol and some other drugs to help ease some of the stress and
Right.
pain that she was carrying around, you know, much of which arrived before child,
Yeah.
but even
Exactly.
still. So she was carrying a healthy amount of trauma anyway. So this method of coping, not so surprising for someone with her life growing up. And then, you know, compound that with a child, tough.
Right. Right.
Well, over time, I think what sometimes happens to people that utilize substances as a way to cope is that as your brain starts to alter from, you know, these chemicals being added into your natural body chemistry, there comes some other thought processes that aren't necessarily the most self-serving,
Right.
out to be polite. So if we want to use a technical term, Stephanie, I would say she became a little bit of a hot mess. So, and as a
Yep.
result, you know, over time, she developed an attitude of, you know, it was everyone else's fault.
Right.
Why
Exactly.
different things were happening to her, and why she felt like she was unfairly treated
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
almost anyone. So to give you a little bit more of a deeper example, and then I'll let this this horse die, is that she is the person that when you walk into a store, and it could be a typical store, 7-Eleven, Walmart, Target, you name it, um, you're almost on eggshells because you're not really sure what's going to happen. But what you are sure of is that there's going to be an argument that's
Some
going to
sort of
ensue.
scene. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it does not matter how polite the salesperson is, that person is going to be rude, is
Mhm.
going to have cut her off, or is going to have said something that was offensive to her. Even something as simple as good morning could
Wow.
be offensive to this young
Yeah.
lady. And that in turn is activates in her the need to set this person straight, for lack of a
Right.
better way to
Right.
say it. And as a result, you are, as a peer or friend of hers, it's very unnerving to constantly be in conflict with
Yeah.
even the most minor of things. And it could be a basic human error. For example, you're ringing someone up, they might have 10 or 12 things, and you forgot to ring up um,
Mhm.
one
Mhm.
of those items. So, you know, happens to the best of cashiers who are rushing and trying to get you out of the store.
Oh, yeah,
And
they're human.
suddenly it's, you know, certainly it's most people are understanding of, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I know that the bill was $42. Well, I'm sorry. To add inflation, the bill is $242
Right.
now, and 26 cents. And yet the initial screen said $224
Yeah.
and now it's
Yeah.
242 after she had to add on the item after you started making your way to pay for the 224. Well, this can turn into a shouting match easily
Yeah.
for this
Right.
woman. You're
Right.
overcharging me. What do you mean? Let's go through the receipt. You're only doing this to me. And I mean, it is a whole scene. Well, as a result, there are challenges that come as a peer to this of basically, in my opinion, I'm not going anywhere else with this woman
Right.
because it is just too stressful.
Yeah.
And even if you try to pull her to the side and say, hey, I don't think that's what's happening. I think that maybe there is someone else, there may be another perspective or viewpoint that you can offer for her. There's no convincing her. It's exactly how she sees it, even if everyone in the group may disagree with her viewpoint.
Right. Right.
So how do you deal with that, Stephanie? I mean, just giving you that
Yeah.
example, like
Yeah.
how I chose to deal with it was simply, I'm not going to. So I've chosen not to be in her company
Mhm.
as much as possible.
And I think that's a really strong and positive decision because we do get to, and that's the key with toxic relationships. We
Mhm.
get to choose how we are going to be treated and how we're going to respond to that. And
Yes.
and that's really the key. And
Mhm.
I think that's sometimes easier to see than other
Mhm.
times.
Mhm.
But I think one of the healthiest things you can do in a situation like that is remove yourself from that
Yes.
situation. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. And then they're going to blame you and then it's going to be your fault, but that's
Yes.
okay. You know the reality and the truth. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's funny, other people in our peer group, there are some people that just cringe and continue to support her.
Yeah.
There's a third person who spends most of their time trying to convince her that her viewpoint is flawed.
Mhm.
Um, and I'll tell you, none of these three approaches have changed anything about her approach. Nothing.
Right. Right.
So,
So what's best for her? Because obviously if she's not willing to see that, okay, maybe I need to change my behavior, maybe I need to do something different. If she's not willing to do that, there's a problem.
yeah.
So
Mhm,
yeah, yeah,
mhm.
absolutely. Wow.
Yeah. So tough situation. However, you do have choices, which thank you
Yes.
for sharing that, Stephanie.
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about those toxic coworkers.
Hmm. Well,
Wonder if you might have
I might
something
I might
about that.
have a made up story that
Yeah,
I'm willing to share. No,
please.
I did have a toxic coworker. Um, and at first it seemed great. I mean, it was one of those situations where I actually became pretty close friends with this person, or so I thought. I think
Hmm.
there was a lot of things that I didn't see or
Hmm.
just let slide. But
Yes.
what ultimately wound up happening was the longer this person was in my life, the more I realized I mean, I would never let somebody talk to me the
Hmm.
way this person talked to me.
Yeah.
And when I stepped back after we did part ways, when I stepped back and really took a look at it, I thought, gosh, what what do I need to change about who I allow in my life? Or even if I guess this person was in my life because of a work situation, but who I allow to become close to me.
Hmm.
And that was a really important lesson for me because what wound up happening, and I had listened to a bunch of stuff. I don't think this person is a narcissist per
Hmm.
se, but a lot of narcissistic characteristics that were
Yeah.
coming out of this individual. And what I realized was that everything this person um, said to me or was telling me how terrible you are, this is, was actually really probably very much directed to them.
Yeah.
And that's when I think you have to step back if you can and say, okay, this is not what I'm going to put up with, or whatever that may be. Now, a coworker that you can work with and, maybe separate emotionally but still work with them, and it's okay. But if you've got somebody who really is responding in a very negative way that affects your work, there are times when you have to go to someone who is maybe higher on the totem pole than you are and
Hmm.
say, this is something I need help with because
Yes.
it's not going very well. So I think that can happen a lot. And I think once it starts to get, and I really think the bottom line is, once you feel like, oh, that was personal, that did not feel good,
Hmm.
that's when you need to start looking at it and saying, this is where I need to make some choices.
Yes. No, you bring up some really valid points, Stephanie. I think, sometimes there's this illusion that you can't do anything. You
Right.
just have to
Right.
deal, especially at work, because,
Yeah.
you know, in personal situations, you have a little bit more flexibilities and freedoms around how you can respond to something.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think, at work, there is this assumption that, fairness is or how people express themselves, just sort of has to be accepted.
Right.
And even poor treatment sometimes has to be accepted if it's right on the edge, or if
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not completely classified under one of the, no policies or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
Um, but there is this, excuse me, every time it seems
I
like
know. Allergies
my,
are terrible right
yes,
now. So we're good.
excuse me, maybe I should start with a sip of water. Thank you.
I'm going to
Um,
stick with coffee here.
yes. So, but I think that it's a really valuable point that you do have some options, and that you have to trust your gut on this, I
Yeah, you
think,
do.
in the
Yeah.
sense that, sometimes one of the things I've done in the past is checked it out with other coworkers. Am I the only one that sort of felt like that comment was
Right.
unnecessary or rude or offensive? Because one of the things that I think people struggle with at work is around being afraid to feel sometimes,
Mm.
and not necessarily wanting to be the only person that has been offended by something,
Right.
even though, your feelings are your reality. Um, so even if it wasn't 100% that, it still can
Yeah.
be very much your
Yeah.
reality.
Right.
But you also have to um, consider that, the ramifications. Again, at work, there are practices and policies that are expected in a different way, sometimes more rigidly than you would do if you were outside of work.
Mhm.
But at the same time, um, no one should have to go to work and feel mistreated,
Right.
or
Right.
feel like their people are purposefully being mean to them or
Exactly.
rude to them, in that way. I think what's unfortunate as you grow up and become adults is that it is more of a culture of acceptance of that, where
Mm.
in school it's, called bullying, or
Right.
people, there are ways to address or deal with people being mistreated. But in the
Yeah.
workplace as an adult, it's sort of, hey, Stephanie, stand up for yourself, or just take it, you
Right.
know.
Exactly. Exactly. I see a lot of that. Get over yourself. You've got,
Hmm.
and so, okay, I'm going to switch it up a little bit, because here's a
Hmm.
question for you, because I had this experience, and I was so I had a friend that I hadn't talked to for a long time. And you know how,
Hmm.
as adults, you tend to talk all the time, and then all of a sudden it's been, years, and then you connect again. And because
Mhm.
life is busy, there are things going on, and it's a lot of work to maintain friendships.
Mhm.
Um, and so I had this friend who I actually left. Um, we were church friends. I actually
Mhm.
left the church and so went to a different church. So there was that separation. And then it
Mhm.
was just life was busy. Had some things going on with my kiddos. Work was I mean, just the thing. And I
Mhm.
reached out to them because I was like, hey, thinking about you, sent a text. You've been on my heart. How are you doing? And to my surprise, I got the most intense text back saying that I was not loyal, that I
Oh,
had abandoned this person, and that I needed to just, and I was like, what the heck did I do?
right. Where
And
did this come from?
yeah, it was the weirdest thing because I could not figure, and so I responded back and I said, gosh, I'm a little baffled because I thought we just kind of lost touch like
Mhm.
adults do. And I don't feel like I abandoned you any more than you abandoned me. You weren't calling me. And
Mhm.
so but I was marked the toxic friend because I had done this horrible thing in abandoning this person. And when I responded and said, "Gosh, help me out here. I'm at a loss." I did not get a response.
Oh,
So I think there's something to communication too. Like if somebody comes to you and says, "Okay, you're being toxic or you're being whatever, you're not being a good support system or a good friend," and that person says, "Tell me more," there has to be communication, or else no one can make those changes.
right. Mhm.
Yeah. So,
No,
doctor, help me with that.
I wish I could. But I think you really made a valid point, which is, resolution cannot occur
Yeah,
without a two-way
that's
communication
right.
around it. And I
Yeah.
think, depending on people's personal experience, I think there are a lot of people that really believe other people can read their mind.
Yes. Yes.
Truly. And it
Yeah.
sounds silly, but I think there are a
Yeah.
lot more people that really believe that, even though I haven't said it, or my favorite is the conversation occurred in my head, you should be
Yes.
able to figure out
Yes.
what it
Exactly.
is that I needed and meet those needs accordingly.
And meet those needs. That's the key point because I think what was so striking to me in that situation was that I had been going through some stuff.
Hmm.
There were some real issues that were happening in my life that could have used a friend to swoop in and say, "How can I support you?"
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes people have this expectation of others that
Hmm.
they are the ones to be the support system. You don't have to do a whole lot of work,
Right.
but they're the ones that have to give, whether you're talking about a toxic coworker, whether you're talking about, because I think that's a lot of that is a control issue.
Hmm.
I can't
Hmm.
control the situation, so now I'm going to turn it around and blame it on you. I don't know. It's very
Yes.
interesting.
No, I think you're right. Absolutely. That there's, I think, with toxic relationships comes toxic communication or lack
Right.
thereof.
Right.
I think people sometimes express part of the story and not all of it.
Right. Right.
And, as humans, I think we naturally fill in the gaps when we don't have all the information. So rather than call you up, Stephanie, and ask, hey, it's been, some time has passed. What's going on with you? Or how
Mhm.
come you didn't respond to dot, dot, dot?
Right.
People just fill in the blanks. Well, she really, abandoned me, or she thought
Mhm.
I said something that she didn't like, or they just fill in the blanks with
They
things that
do.
are oftentimes not accurate because
Right.
there's no basis for that.
Right.
um
Exactly. Exactly.
s-
Yeah. And I think when you're dealing with, and unfortunately, and here's what I will say, that, you know, when you're dealing with a toxic coworker, when you're dealing with, it is really important that we respond with respect and
Yes.
good communication and not gossip,
Yes.
because ultimately that toxic behavior will show itself
Yeah.
as what it is.
Hmm.
You will come away unscathed if you handle that situation with grace.
Hmm. No, absolutely. And, if that becomes your reputation, that
Yeah.
you don't engage in toxic communication or conversations or things of that sort, it is very hard to tie you to things.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
one of the things that I think sometimes we don't always do well at work, especially, is if there is a toxic dialogue that's happening, people just hang out and listen to it or participate
Mhm.
in it, when
Mhm.
really that may be the time to remove yourself,
Right,
because it's
exactly.
very hard to say that Stephanie witnessed something if she wasn't there.
So true. Yes, exactly.
Or
Yeah.
that she was a part of something if she
Right,
wasn't there.
right, right.
um,
Yeah.
so that kind of brings me to, the solutions, because obviously we can talk all day about the problems, Stephanie, and how toxicity can be, really like a bad cold. I mean, it just
Yeah.
affects every part of your body after a
Right.
while. But what do you think people need to hear or need to do in order to resolve this?
You know, I think it's important to recognize you can't resolve that person. That
Yes.
what you need to resolve is how you respond to that behavior.
Yeah.
And that's really the key piece. And so whether that means that you need to physically separate yourself from that person, and
Hmm.
that's okay, or whether it means that you need to I talked to a friend of mine who had a toxic situation with a toxic coworker at work, and she just said, "Every time I meet with you, there will be somebody else in the room."
Mm.
And so, you know, making sure that you've got your ducks in a row, and maybe you're not alone with that person. That's not a bad way to handle that if it's
Mhm.
a coworker type situation. But the the important thing is you can't fix or change that individual. You can only change and be responsible for how you respond.
No, that's huge, Stephanie. And it's funny because I just thought about another situation, very similar to what you just described, and having another person or a witness, for lack of a better way to
Yeah,
say it, I think is really a fantastic approach to assuring that that communication is witnessed, and you have a third person to really help support what you're
right.
seeing or not seeing. Something else that I think you can do, particularly with coworkers, is if there has to be a one-on-one discussion with this person, follow it up with a written dialogue of what occurred.
Yes. Yes. Put it in
So maybe,
writing.
yes, send a summary email and say, hey, Stephanie, you and I talked about these 3 or 4 points, and please acknowledge that you've heard and understand this, to the email.
Yeah,
So that way, I'll tell you, that has saved me, particularly in supervisory relationships,
absolutely.
um, to assure that my point and information shared was delivered and understood.
Yeah.
Um,
Document, document, document.
that is huge. And even with that, there are still some people that will disagree with it
Mhm,
or
mhm.
will feel like that's not what I said. But then you have the acknowledgement of understanding piece
Right.
as well.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so, and again, not to say that that solves everything, but it's certainly, I think, a start and a
Yeah.
bridge for you to get to confirmation of communication.
Yep.
So there's that. I think, since we're talking about work, something else that comes to mind is, this is maybe where you have to get a supervisor involved,
Mhm.
either your supervisor or their supervisor,
Right,
um,
right,
to have that person kind of support maybe what is happening, or not support it, or take a stand on what's happening in such a way that the other person, um, will be clear about what the expectations are or the policies are in the
right,
office.
right.
um, a lot of times people try to handle things one on one, and that's good. And that's a good place to start. But if you're not getting anywhere in
Yeah,
your communication with that person and they just still, kind of keep up whatever may be going on that's problematic for you, excuse me, then the supervisor, is, I think, essential to
yeah,
helping to support that effort.
I agree.
Um,
I agree. Sometimes you can't do it alone.
no, a lot of times you can't do it
Yeah,
alone.
most of the time you can't do it
Yes.
alone.
Well, when I
But
think about, oh, go ahead. No,
no,
Stephanie, go
well, I was
ahead.
just gonna say, but don't carry it on yourself. And I think sometimes, when you're dealing with somebody who is toxic or has narcissistic behaviors, their response is, you are at fault, you are the
Yes.
problem, you are the one. And so really check that and yourself and make sure that you're not internalizing that, because
Mhm,
now if there are things they say that are legitimate, take a look at that. What can I change? But if it's not
mhm,
legit, you need to not internalize that. And that's hard to
mhm.
do.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Something else I would offer is the pause. And that is really, if someone comes to you with, a lot of quote unquote drama, or
Yeah.
a lot of things that are problematic, or a scenario that they want to, um, re-engage with you about, or rehearse over and over again with you about, sometimes you just have to not respond
Yeah.
initially.
Right.
Take a minute. Maybe you have to come up with some phrases. Hey, let me get back to you on that. Or, let me sleep on that. Or, I hear what you're saying. And that may be one way to look at it. But
Yeah.
there's different phrases that you can use to kind of protect yourself and give yourself some time to sort through what it is that they're saying.
Hmm.
And I think one of the triggering points is if you're having, what I call an immediate physical reaction.
Yeah.
Is your stomach turned upside down? If you're starting to sweat or get hot or really irritated by something
Yeah.
that somebody's saying, that really should be a trigger for you to pause,
Yeah.
and not
Absolutely.
responding. And, I was the queen of the emotional email senders kind of back in the day, where it's like an email comes across and I'm already in a mood, and
Yeah.
it feels like it comes through your screen in flames.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
am like swatting it out with the first thing I can see, you know, and I would respond. Now I could never
Never
type
good.
super fast, but when it
Never
was an
good.
emotional email, 100
Yeah.
words a minute,
Yeah.
easily
Exactly.
120, 140.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would just fire it back. And then when I paused, typically after that,
Yeah.
I would
Unfortunately, after
say,
you hit send.
right,
Right.
I would. And I'm thinking, with all the technology in this world, we haven't figured out how to unsend emails before the other person sees them.
Yeah.
It just,
You can apparently pull it back, but they can still see it. So I
right.
don't
So what's the point? Um, but anyway,
Yeah.
and I remember being reprimanded by a
Oh,
leader
wow.
of mine for that reason. And, he said, you have got to wait before you
Yeah.
send an email, and
Yeah.
you cannot respond to someone in that way.
Yeah.
But I was thinking what I had to say was right,
Yeah.
but not
Doesn't matter.
not at the right time.
Well, and I think too, you make a great point, because when you have a physical reaction, yes, you need to pause. But when somebody's coming at you with a kind of a hostile reaction,
Mhm,
and it's clearly not a professional conversation, it's clearly not a thought out conversation,
mhm,
that is your moment to say, you know what? Let's come back to this. You're
Mhm.
obviously upset. I don't want to say something that I don't um, mean in the moment. Let's take a pause. Let's take a pause.
Mhm.
And come back and have this conversation when you're not being such a beep. No, don't say that. But
Right. Uh, right.
but yes, let's come back to this so we can have an adult, emotionless, professional
Conversation.
conversation. Yeah.
I think that's really key. And then I would say when we're talking about, personal relationships or friendships,
Yeah.
sometimes you gotta talk to somebody else, maybe somebody
Right.
else in the friend group,
Yeah.
somebody else who gets it. And it's always nice to have a conversation with somebody else who knows the person,
Yeah.
because they can
Yeah.
kind of understand maybe what you're dealing with or what you've been exposed to, or if they were a witness to this behavior that was really
Mhm.
inappropriate in your viewpoint, just to kind of check out, hey, am I seeing this correctly?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I think we've all been in highly emotional states where maybe our understanding wasn't as clear. And just as I
Right.
talked about that emotional email piece, I was already upset,
Yep.
and busy and stressed, and let's be honest, when we're already exhausted, that may not
Yeah.
necessarily be the
Yeah.
best time for us to make a decision about something,
Right.
or even receive it and with the intention that it was meant for.
Right.
Because it's
Exactly.
funny, just pausing a day, sometimes I can read an email or read a text message or hear a conversation, and it just hits differently,
It does. It does.
you
And
know.
one of the things I do too is if I'm sending a response, um, that is a needed response, I always send it to someone else first.
Mm,
So,
mhm.
how does this, well, that might have sounded a little snarky. Let's
Yeah,
rework that. And so
yeah,
I think that helps a little bit too, to just make sure that somebody else is viewing it who is a little bit more objective in the situation
yeah.
and can tell you, I might word that a little differently. And that's where it's good to have honest friends and
Mhm.
honest support system, that you've got people in your life who are willing to tell you, you might be seeing this way because, and
Yeah.
maybe that's not the best way to go about
Mhm.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to think of it as using cotton dentures as opposed to wooden ones. So a soft bite in your response as opposed to
Yes.
a hard bite.
Yes.
Because,
Exactly.
I do think that there are some conversations that do warrant a level of intensity based on the
Firmness.
subject,
Yeah.
but not necessarily. I think the goal should never be to hurt someone in your
Right.
response,
Right.
but to be, as lovingly kind as you can be. Um,
Exactly.
because obviously, well, maybe not obviously to some, but hopefully your intention is that you want to leave somebody with a positive influence as opposed to maybe a negative if it's possible.
You always should. And I saw a meme that said something like, if standing up for yourself is is burning a bridge, let's take it down in flames. And I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. You can stand up for yourself with
Mhm.
grace and dignity and not
Yes.
burn bridges. I think
Hmm.
anytime you're burning a bridge, that's the wrong approach.
Yes. No, I agree. And just to kind of go with the title of this conversation today, if you feel like the world is against you and every scenario that you run into, there's conflict, that's where you may want to think about seeking professional help.
Yeah, because
Um,
again, it goes back to that common denominator, right?
yeah, exactly. There is no reason for every instance of communication turns into an argument. There is
Mhm.
something going on, likely with you.
Right, right.
So, and I think a therapist or a coach or someone of that sort can kind of help you
Yeah,
sort out what may be going on. And sometimes it takes, extreme behavior for you to realize or recognize that you need some additional support. You
Right.
know, if
Right.
every time that you call someone, they're sending you to voicemail and that's all of your family, that should might be a sign that you're a little too much. So
Mm,
with that, you
yeah.
might want to consider talking to somebody who's professionally trained to help support you and help you sort out what may be going on because it could be deeper. I mean,
Right.
you know, there are all
Right.
sorts of things that happen in our bodies sometimes that we don't understand. There's a level of complexity there that really professionally trained people. You know,
Yeah.
if you haven't gone for a physical, go see your doctor. You
Right.
know, if you need some emotional support and help, you know, get yourself a therapist, somebody professionally trained to help you manage your emotions and your
I
mental
agree.
health. It's
Absolutely.
essential. And I think, you know, honestly, we can't deny that we are still living in a pandemic. You
Hmm.
know, there
Right.
are
Right.
other things that have happened as a result of this pandemic. You know, the
Yeah.
supply chain issues, you know, now we're, you know, on the verge of a recession, you know, the
Yep.
prices and, you know, things are really high. People are stretched to their limits. So please don't be
And now we got
surprised.
monkeypox coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
So come on.
So let's not be surprised if
Yep.
maybe you can't handle it all,
Yeah. Right.
you
Right. There's
know.
a lot going on. And I think that too, to your point, if you take, people should be able to disagree with you.
Yes.
People should be able to say, gosh, yeah, I get your opinion. I respect your opinion. You and I are on different pages. If every time somebody does that, you take that as a personal assault,
Yes.
that's something you need to look at as well. Yeah.
Yes, unless you're always right, like I am.
Well, that's different. That's
Yes,
different. You and I, totally different. But other
right.
people, yeah.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And then one other thing I would offer, Stephanie, is that this is the time maybe to activate some spiritual practices.
Yeah.
You know, there are things like meditation, there are, you know, there's yoga. If you are, you know, have a faith orientation, this may be the time to activate,
Great.
you know, exactly prayer, going to a worship service, you know,
Mhm.
reading some faith-based literature, you know, all of these things, you know, talking to people with strong faiths who maybe can help support
Yeah.
you and direct you to ways to help support yourself through, you
Right.
know, some of your faith traditions. um you know, I recently talked with somebody who was going on a silent retreat,
Hmm.
and you know, it's interesting because
I have a
in this
story about a silent retreat, but go ahead.
you know, and I mean, again, this is not somebody who I find to be pretty
Mhm.
excessive with words, so I'm thinking, I mean, you're not that talkative to begin with. So maybe this
Mhm.
wouldn't be that hard. Now, for somebody like me, runaway train, I'm thinking that it might be a little tough to get through a silent retreat. But
I gotta
I'm
tell you my
curious though,
story
Stephanie,
really quick. Yeah.
what your
So
feelings are about
went
retreat.
went to a retreat center.
Please.
Went to a retreat center where they were holding a silent retreat. So we weren't a part of the silent retreat, but the center was holding a silent retreat. So it required silence everywhere that was not our space. So lunches, dinners, breakfast, all silent. And so I was sitting at this table trying not to look at any of my friends because I knew. And one of them caught my eye and I just started to laugh. And my laugh is not quiet. And I started to laugh and I got up. I had to put my hand over my mouth and run out of the room. People probably thought she is about ready to puke all over the place. It was so bad because I could not. Being silent is not, I can be silent if I'm on my own, but yeah, I'm not good at that. So don't invite me to a silent retreat.
Right.
I would
For
not be
those that want to book Stephanie after this conversation, book her to lead a silent retreat. She probably won't come.
it would be a very loud silent retreat.
A loudly silent. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
please don't do that.
So I guess what I'll say, Stephanie, just if I could give some words to end on, and then I'd ask you to do the same.
Yeah.
Um, toxic relationships, I think in some ways are inevitable because as you meet and experience people,
Yep.
everyone will not be able to manage in a way that's classified as the most healthy,
Yeah.
but have some patience, show
Yeah.
people some grace, and offer some support. And it may be through tools such as,
Yeah.
hey, have you thought about going to talk to somebody about that, or
Yeah.
something like that? And let's try to be, loving and more kind to each other. So
Absolutely.
Stephanie.
Yes, I agree. And what I would really caution people against is gossip. Stay away
Yes.
from talking about that person. Oh my gosh, did you listen to what this person said? It only does damage and harm, and it increases the toxicity in
Mhm.
that workplace or in that friendship or in that wherever, whatever that atmosphere is. It just increases that toxicity. So along with giving people grace and just, being gentle and genuine with people, don't gossip about them.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Do you mind to
Thank
pull up
you.
our last slide
Yes,
so we can talk about
absolutely. Let
what's
me
coming next?
let me do that. Here we go.
Okay. So we are going to jump into our new series coming in July, and that would be our wellness series. And that's where we would begin to talk about self care and what are some of the things that you can do to take better care of yourselves
Yeah.
so that you can be a better friend and maybe even less toxic. Who knows?
Maybe. I don't know. That would be good.
Yes,
Yeah, the more
exactly.
self-care you give yourself, the less toxic you tend to be. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then in the month of August, we'll specify self care around technology and whether or not it's helping or maybe even hurting you.
Yeah.
Um, so we'll talk about those. And obviously, in the future, Stephanie, if you don't mind to talk about if people wanted to work with us as a duo or even
Absolutely.
separately, how might they find us?
Yes, you can actually reach out to us on now, do you have the new Elevate 3.0?
Oh, I don't have that.
Let
Yikes.
let let so you can go to elevate.ac and find us. You can also find me at stephanieolson.com, which actually does have a link to the Elevate 3.0. And Sabrina, where can they find you?
So they can find me obviously and actually on the Elevate site as well.
Hmm.
And for those of you, we'll be posting some additional Elevate 3.0 links specifically. I apologize. This was done, I think, before
Yeah,
our
I didn't
new
even think about that.
right
Yeah.
our new site launched, but people can find me there. And then also on LinkedIn, I pretty much publish what I'm up
Yeah.
to every day on LinkedIn, so please look for me there under Sabrina Townsend. But we look forward to talking with people and working with you in the future if you're interested. One other point I would add on the Elevate platform: if you do subscribe and become a member of Elevate, then you will have access to a wealth of professional speakers and
Yes.
consultants and trainers around the world who
Yes.
are able to talk through topics anywhere from leadership to sustainability to diversity, equity, and inclusion to supporting mental health
Yes.
to, cooking. I mean, you name it, all sorts of topics. So we would invite you to join and subscribe to elevate.ac as a way to engage with us further after today, but continue to look for us on these monthly talks. I'm glad to be here. Stephanie, any final plans for the weekend before we close out?
I'm going to try and do as much as nothing as possible this weekend.
Oh, wow.
So, yes, that is what I'm looking forward to. How about you?
Well, actually, I have some friends in town. So
Nice.
we will be spending some time possibly poolside
Ooh, very
tomorrow.
good. Yes.
And if not, doing the next best thing that typically is the opposite of pooling, and that's eating. So we'll probably check out a
You can
restaurant.
actually do both at the same time.
Well, that's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
So very good.
So yes, so looking forward to that. So thank you so much. Thank you, LinkedIn Live, to those that have an
Yes.
opportunity to view us later or were able to view us today. We were glad to be here, and we'll see you next month.
All right. We'll see you later.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.